Imagine boarding a flight, thinking it's just another routine trip, only to find yourself in the middle of a confrontation that exposes raw privilege, hidden power, and the quiet strength of someone you least expected. That's exactly what happened on Flight 9, where a young white woman took the seat of Julian Carter, a calm and composed black CEO. But there's more than meets the eye. This isn't just about a stolen seat. Who really holds authority when appearances deceive? And what happens when dignity collides with entitlement at 35,000 feet? As tensions mount in first class, passengers watch a subtle battle unfold, silent gestures, calculated restraint, and internal debates that reveal the heart of character and courage. Julian's quiet authority contrasts with the impulsive arrogance of a passenger who assumes status can override fairness. And Naomi, a curious observer, begins to question not only the events she witnesses, but her own assumptions about power, race, and respect. This story isn't just about one flight. It's a reflection of society, our biases, and the moments that test integrity. Are we ready to confront what we see in ourselves when challenged? Hit like, share, and subscribe to join us as we dive into a story that will challenge your expectations and keep you on the edge of your seat. The boarding doors had just closed at Chicago O'Hare when Julian Carter stepped into the narrow aisle of Aurora Airlines Flight 726. His body carried the weight of 3 sleepless nights in Manhattan, endless meetings where he'd smiled, nodded, pitched, and defended the worth of Orion Dynamics, the technology giant he had built from scratch. Every room, every handshake, every presentation carried the same burden, proving himself, again and again, in spaces where he was still too often the only black man at the table. Tonight, all he wanted was rest, a chance to sink into seat 2A by the window, breathe in the silence above the clouds, and reset before tomorrow's board session in San Francisco. His boarding pass was crumpled slightly, the ink faint from the sweat of his palm, but the seat assignment was clear. 2A, first class, his seat, but someone was already there. A blonde woman in her early 50s sat with the ease of ownership, legs crossed, designer scarf draped neatly, phone in hand. Her manicure gleamed under the overhead lights as she scrolled through high-end property listings like she was browsing the morning paper. Without lifting her eyes, she reached for the glass of champagne on the armrest. A subtle sip, a signal that she was settled, comfortable, unmovable. Julian's voice, when it came, was smooth and confident, not aggressive, but firm enough to be heard over the shuffle of passengers stowing bags overhead. "Excuse me," he said, holding up his boarding pass as though it were a badge. "I think there's been some mistake." The woman Catherine Whitmore finally raised her gaze. Her blue eyes swept over him in a single practiced motion. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't surprise. It was assessment. And in that instant, Julian felt it. That subtle calculation he had endured his entire life. The kind of look that asked, "What are you doing here? Who let you in?" "Oh," Catherine said, the syllable rolling off her tongue with condescension polished by years of privilege. "I'm sure we can work something out. Perhaps you could find another seat. I've already gotten quite comfortable here." Julian drew a slow breath. He was tired, bone-deep tired. He wore a black hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers so understated most people wouldn't know they cost more than a month's rent. It was deliberate. After years of tailored suits and stiff ties, sometimes he wanted to move through the world in comfort. But comfort, he knew, came with conditions when you looked like him. "Ma'am," he said evenly, fighting down the familiar rise of frustration, "this is seat 2A. According to my boarding pass, my assigned seat." Catherine tilted her head, as if studying a piece of furniture she hadn't ordered. Her lips curled into a faint smile, more dismissal than courtesy. "Yes, I can see that," she replied, gesturing lazily toward his pass. "But surely you understand that mistakes happen. I'm an Aurora Platinum member, and I specifically requested a first-class window seat. I'm sure if you speak to the flight attendant, they can find you something more appropriate." The word hung heavy. Appropriate. Julian had heard it 1,000 times, wrapped in different packages. Appropriate for the meeting, appropriate for the fundraiser, appropriate for someone like you. Always code, always cutting. Around him, the first-class cabin stirred. A man in 1D pretended to check his phone, but tilted it to catch the reflection. A couple in row 3 whispered behind raised menus. Others deliberately looked away. The international sign for "not my problem." Julian glanced at his watch, a Philippe he had gifted himself after Orion's IPO. He didn't need the time. The gesture steadied him, reminded him of what he had built, of the lives and futures tied to the emails still waiting on the laptop in his bag. Contracts, innovations, whole industries shifting under his direction. None of it mattered now, in this moment, to Catherine Whitmore. He was simply another black man who had wandered into the wrong place. "I understand your concern," Julian said carefully, each word measured. "But this is my seat. I'd appreciate it if you checked your boarding pass for your correct assignment." Catherine laughed. A sharp sound. Cutting. Dismissive. "My dear, I think you're confused about how things work here. This is first class. Not." She let her eyes travel deliberately down his hoodie and jeans. Not where people usually dress so casually. The implication struck like a slap, though Julian kept his expression steady. He had faced worse in conference rooms, in interviews, in the subtle pauses before someone shook his hand. It was always the same. The assumption that he didn't belong, that his credentials must be a mistake, that his presence was temporary, fragile, conditional. What Catherine didn't know, what no one in this cabin yet knew, was that Julian Carter wasn't just another passenger. Through a quiet network of acquisitions orchestrated by Orion Dynamics, he was now the majority owner of Aurora Airlines. 67% of every plane, every seat, every boarding pass, including the one Catherine was dismissing. But he had learned long ago, never reveal power too early. Better to let people show who they really were when they thought there would be no consequences. "I'm not confused about anything," Julian replied. His tone was calm, but the edge in it drew a few more eyes from neighboring seats. "This is my seat, and I'd like you to move. For the first time." Catherine's confidence flickered, just slightly. Her brows arched in challenge. She leaned back, claiming more of the seat as though her posture alone could defend it. "Look, I don't know what game you're trying to play, but I'm not moving. I've flown Aurora for years. I know how these things work. If there's been an error, the airline will sort it out in a way that makes sense." The implication was crystal clear. Someone like you doesn't deserve to be here, no matter what your boarding pass says. Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his assistant, Kai, checking if he had boarded. Deadlines, boardrooms, millions of dollars all waiting. But none of that mattered here. The only thing that mattered was the silence stretching across the aisle, thick with judgment and disbelief. He stood there, tall and unmoving, the aisle narrowing around him, the murmurs of passengers, the faint clink of glasses, the hum of the cabin, everything felt sharpened, suspended. He had a choice: move quietly, keep the peace, or hold his ground, Not today, he thought. Not this time. Ma'am, Julian said again, his voice now carrying an unmistakable authority, I'm going to ask you one more time. Move. This is my seat, and I intend to sit in it. The air inside the cabin thickened as Julian's words settled into the space between him and Catherine. His voice hadn't risen, but something in the timbre measured, unwavering, undeniable, carried through the rows like a current. Passengers who had been feigning indifference now turned openly to watch. Catherine, for her part, wasn't used to defiance. Her life had been built on the kind of money and status that dissolved obstacles with a phone call or a check. Her smile returned, tight at the corners, brittle. You're being difficult, she said, her tone coated in false reasonableness. I'm sure the crew can find you another seat, one that better suits your situation. Julian tilted his head. My situation? He had heard that phrase before, too. It was never about logistics. It was about identity, skin color, assumptions. The silent suggestion that he had stepped somewhere he didn't belong. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. Kai. Another reminder of the world waiting beyond this aisle. Emails, contracts, a multi-million-dollar strategy session. Yet here he was, locked in a battle over a single seat, a scrap of territory that suddenly represented more than fabric and armrests. Julian leaned forward slightly, not menacing, but steady enough that Catherine's eyes flickered. This isn't about difficulty, he said, each word deliberate. It's about respect. Respect for the boarding pass I hold, respect for the policies you claim to know, respect for me. The murmur of voices grew louder now. A man 2 rows back whispered something to his companion, who shook her head quickly, eyes darting toward Julian with quiet recognition. In row 4, an elderly black couple exchanged a glance that spoke of decades of familiarity with what they were seeing. Catherine's laugh broke the tension for a moment, but the sound was sharp, brittle glass against steel. Don't make this bigger than it is. You're trying to turn a simple mix-up into some kind of crusade. I'm sure you think you're making a point. But this is first class. Mistakes happen. Someone like you shouldn't overreact. The phrase slid into the air like poison. Someone like you. Julian felt the words ignite something in his chest. Not rage. Something colder. Focused. The kind of fire he had learned to channel in boardrooms where entire industries had tried to dismiss him with that same phrase. Someone like me, he repeated, his voice quiet, but carrying. Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, what exactly do you mean by that? A hush fell. Every passenger now was listening, some holding their breath, others shifting uncomfortably under the weight of implication. Catherine hesitated, her lips parted, then closed. For the first time, the lines of her privilege faltered. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on her. But retreat was not in her vocabulary. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to what she must have thought was a reasonable tone, but still loud enough for those nearby to hear. I mean, you don't look like you belong here, dressed like that, acting like this. It doesn't fit. There it was, stripped of politeness, naked, unguarded bias. Julian inhaled deeply, grounding himself. His internal voice whispered the options. You could sit in another seat. Let it pass. Keep the peace, like you've done 1,000 times before. But what does that teach them? What does that teach you? His heart thudded. He thought of his parents, his father's sermons about dignity, his mother's lessons in resilience. He thought of the countless young men and women who looked up to him, hoping his existence in the halls of power meant the world was shifting, however slightly. Not today, he told himself. Before he could answer, a soft chime cut through the air. Catherine's manicured hand hovered near the call button, which now glowed faintly above her head. She had pressed it with the confidence of someone summoning service at a five-star restaurant. Moments later, a flight attendant appeared. Her name tag read Naomi Tanaka. She was young, polished, her black hair swept neatly into a bun, the kind of composure that came from training, not from instinct. Her eyes flicked between Julian and Catherine, then dropped quickly to the boarding pass in Julian's hand. "Good evening," Naomi said, her voice practiced. "I understand there's a seating issue." Catherine immediately leaned forward, adopting the tone of a long-suffering customer who had endured an ordeal. "Thank goodness you came. I've been in this seat since boarding. I specifically requested it. This gentleman is insisting it's his, but clearly there's been a mistake." Naomi turned to Julian, her professional smile intact but thinner. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Julian handed it over without a word. Her eyes scanned the document, her frown deepening. She glanced up at the seat number above Catherine's head, then back at the ticket. The truth was undeniable. Seat 2A belonged to Julian Carter. "Yes," Naomi said slowly. "It does appear that this is your assigned seat. Mr. Carter." Julian felt a flicker of relief, short-lived, because Naomi didn't stop there. However, she continued, her voice cautious. "Mrs. Whitmore is already settled, and she's one of our platinum members. Perhaps we could move you to another seat in first class. Row 3 has an aisle seat available with excellent leg room. We'd be happy to make sure you receive priority service for the inconvenience." Julian's eyes narrowed. "The inconvenience," he repeated softly. "You mean the inconvenience of someone else sitting in my seat?" Catherine pounced on the moment. "I think that's more than fair," she said quickly. "I'm already situated. It's really no trouble for him to move. And with his attire, I'm sure an aisle seat is more comfortable." Naomi gave an encouraging smile, as though compromise were the golden solution. "We always strive for harmony in situations like this. I hope you understand. Harmony." Julian looked around the cabin. Faces stared back, some curious, some sympathetic, some embarrassed. In row 3, a woman with a press badge clipped to her blazer leaned forward, her phone angled just so, recording discreetly. Further back, a young man's phone glowed with the telltale red dot of live streaming. He wasn't hiding it. Julian weighed the silence. Every nerve in him screamed to let it go, to sit down somewhere, anywhere, and make the flight leave on time. But another voice deeper, older, unyielding rose up within him. "If not you, then who if not now?" "Then when I appreciate your suggestion," Julian said finally, turning back to Naomi. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. "But I'll take the seat I was assigned, the seat I paid for, the seat clearly marked on my boarding pass." Naomi hesitated, her smile cracking at the edges. Catherine's face tightened with disbelief, her veneer of entitlement fraying. "You're being unreasonable," Catherine snapped. Her voice rose, no longer hiding behind civility. "I've offered solutions. He's refusing all of them. That tells me everything I need to know about his character." Julian almost laughed. Character. How many times had that word been turned against him? Character as code for obedience, for deference, for knowing when to disappear. "My character," Julian said, voice low, deliberate. "Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore." What exactly does my character have to do with your refusal to leave my seat for the first time? Catherine faltered, her lips parted, but no answer came. She pressed them together, frustrated. Then, with a sharp movement, she raised her hand higher, pressing the call button again. The chime echoed louder this time, as though summoning not just a flight attendant, but the weight of authority. Naomi glanced nervously toward the front of the cabin. "Perhaps I should get the captain involved," she murmured. Catherine's smile returned. Triumphant. "Yes, get someone with real authority. Maybe he can explain to this man how things work up here." Julian exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steady. He nodded once. "By all means." He said, "Let's get someone with authority involved." The words carried a quiet irony. No one yet knew just how much authority Julian Carter truly held. The cabin seemed to shrink as Naomi hurried to the front. Julian remained standing in the aisle, one hand on his carry-on, the other still holding his boarding pass as though it were a shield. Catherine lounged back in the seat that wasn't hers, her expression the smug calm of someone certain that the universe had tilted in her favor. She picked up her glass again, swirling the champagne like a victor at the end of a duel. "You'll see," she said under her breath, just loud enough for Julian and the nearest passengers to hear. "The captain will handle this. They know who their real customers are." Julian didn't answer. He kept his eyes steady on the window beyond Catherine's head, watching the last luggage truck pull away from the belly of the plane. He thought about the irony of it all. Years building systems to make Aurora Airlines run more efficiently, more profitably, more fairly. And here he was fighting for one square of leather in row 2. Catherine cleared her throat as if announcing herself to the entire cabin. "I don't usually have to deal with this sort of nonsense," she said, projecting her voice like an actress on stage. "But these days, it seems anyone can buy a ticket and think they're entitled to everything." A ripple of discomfort passed through the cabin. Some passengers kept their heads down, but others shifted in their seats, unable to ignore the sharp edge in her words. An older black woman, 2 rows back, narrowed her eyes and muttered something to her husband. The young man with the phone angled it higher, catching both Julian and Catherine in the frame. Julian's mind ticked through possibilities. He had seen this play before, in boardrooms and conferences. Catherine was the type who lived by hierarchy, who believed money not only opened doors, but gave her the right to close them on others. He recognized the performance. She wasn't just defending a seat. She was defending a worldview. The curtain at the front of the cabin stirred, and Naomi returned, her steps brisk but uneasy. Behind her, Captain Michael Anders emerged, his crisp uniform pressed, his silver hair catching the overhead light. He carried himself with the steady gravity of decades in the cockpit, a man accustomed to authority being obeyed without question. "Good evening," Anders said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I understand there's a seating issue here." Before Julian could speak, Catherine launched into her version. "Captain, thank you for coming. I'm Catherine Whitmore, Platinum Elite. I requested this seat weeks ago. There's clearly been some kind of error. This gentleman insists it's his, but I think we can resolve this quickly if you'll just allow me to remain here and relocate him elsewhere." Anders nodded slowly, his eyes moving to Julian. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Julian handed it over, his expression unreadable. Anders studied it, then glanced at the seat number. His brow furrowed. "It does say 2A. Catherine leaned forward, voice syrupy, with faux patience. "Yes, but surely we can be practical here. I'm already settled. He looks flexible. I'm sure he can adjust." Julian felt the weight of every gaze in the cabin. He heard the hum of the engines as they idled, ready for pushback. He thought of the thousands of employees whose paychecks depended on Aurora Airlines, of the meetings in San Francisco he was due to lead. But above all that, he thought of his father's voice echoing from long ago. Dignity is not negotiable. Son, if you give it away once, they'll take it every time. I appreciate your concern, Captain, Julian said evenly, but I won't be moving. This is my assigned seat. Anders sighed, a weary sound. He looked from Julian to Catherine, then back again. Sir, I understand, but sometimes these situations call for flexibility. Mrs. Whitmore is a valued customer, and we want to keep everyone comfortable. Julian's jaw tightened, comfortable for whom he asked quietly. The question hung there, unanswered, until Catherine filled the silence. Comfortable for the people who actually belong here, she said. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The words were out, raw and unfiltered. No more coded language, no more polite disguises. Julian let the silence stretch. He studied Catherine the way he might study a hostile investor across a boardroom table. Calm, clinical, but with an undercurrent of fire. Then he spoke, his voice low, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Captain, is it Aurora policy that Platinum members can take any seat they want, even if it belongs to someone else? Anders shifted uncomfortably. No, sir. That's not policy. Is it Aurora policy? Julian pressed, his voice gaining quiet strength. That passengers can decide who does and doesn't belong in first class. Anders' mouth opened, then closed. The cabin was silent except for the faint buzz of Tyler's phone as comments poured into his live stream. Thousands of viewers were now watching. The hashtag #BabySeat2A began flashing across screens far beyond the fuselage. Catherine's confidence cracked. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're turning a simple seating error into some kind of social issue. He's making a spectacle out of nothing. Julian finally lowered his carry-on into the overhead bin, his movements unhurried. He turned to Catherine, his eyes steady. You made it into a spectacle when you decided my presence here was negotiable, when you decided your comfort was more important than my dignity. Catherine flushed, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. I don't have to sit here and be accused of things. Captain, remove him. I won't be spoken to this way. Anders raised a hand, his voice calm but uneasy. Let's all take a breath. Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Carter, please. We need to resolve this so we can depart on schedule. Julian studied him, then leaned slightly closer. His words were measured, each syllable distinct. Departure schedules matter, but justice matters more. And right now, the world is watching. Anders glanced toward the back, noticing for the first time the phones raised, the quiet recording, the young man live-streaming with a trembling excitement in his hands. Awareness dawned. This wasn't just a dispute over a seat. This was becoming a public reckoning. Rachel Morales, the journalist in row 3, closed her notebook and angled her phone for a clearer shot. She had covered courtrooms, protests, hearings in Congress. She knew the smell of history when it was being written, and tonight, in this cabin, it reeked of it. Catherine shifted uncomfortably under the weight of so many eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her certainty unraveling. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Julian lowered himself slowly into the seat across the aisle, not to concede, but to bide his moment. His mind was racing. He had power no one here suspected, authority greater than the captain, greater than any platinum status. But he wasn't ready to reveal it, not yet. Let the truth unfold in its own time, when every word, every slight, every injustice was undeniable. He glanced once more at Catherine, whose smile was now brittle and forced. "This isn't about a seat," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It's about who gets to define who belongs." The engines hummed louder as the plane prepared for pushback, but inside the cabin, the real turbulence had only just begun. The plane vibrated with the low rumble of engines preparing for departure, but inside the cabin, the air was tighter than the fuselage itself. Julian sat upright in the seat across from Catherine, though every inch of him felt like it was resisting the urge to claim what was rightfully his. He knew he could end this now with a single revelation, but something deeper pressed him to wait. Sometimes the truth needed time to unfold, to trap arrogance in its own net. Naomi lingered nearby, her hands clasped in front of her like a student waiting for instructions. She looked at Julian with a kind of nervous sympathy, but also at Catherine with the instinctive deference given to high-status passengers. Julian caught it immediately. That tilt of the body, that measured patience. Naomi was leaning toward Catherine's comfort. The older black couple in row 4 exchanged knowing glances. They had flown enough times to see the choreography. Keep the loud customer happy, even if it means nudging the quieter one to sacrifice. The husband shook his head and muttered, "Same story every time." Catherine shifted in the seat, her handbags arranged like trophies marking territory. She smoothed her skirt and shot Julian a glance dripping with disdain. "I really don't know why you're making such a fuss," she said. "It's just a seat." "If you weren't so desperate to prove something, we could have been in the air by now." Julian inhaled slowly, forcing his chest to rise and fall with control. He wasn't desperate to prove something. He was desperate not to repeat history. He thought of his father, who had once been forced to give up a bus seat in Georgia decades earlier. Julian had grown up on those stories, the sharp edge of humiliation, the quiet rage of dignity denied, and now, at 41 years old, with a company that spanned continents, he was staring down the same script rewritten in the polished cabin of first class. Captain Anders stood in the aisle, torn between authority and appeasement. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "we do need to consider that Mr. Carter's boarding pass clearly lists 2A. The airline assigns seats for a reason." Catherine's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Captain, with all due respect, I know how these things work. I've been a platinum elite for 15 years. I practically live on your planes. If there's a conflict, you accommodate status passengers. That's how it's always been done." Anders hesitated. He had, in fact, been trained to prioritize elite customers. He had, more than once, asked a coach passenger to move forward or back to make room for a frequent flyer. But this was different. The seat wasn't Catherine's. The boarding pass was undeniable. Still, his eyes flicked toward Naomi, searching for an easy solution, some way to avoid confrontation. Julian caught that flicker and felt a familiar sting. Authority too often bent toward convenience, not justice. His inner voice spoke again. "Say it. Julian, end this. Tell them who you are." But another voice pushed back, the strategist within him. "Not yet. Let them reveal themselves. Let the world see." Tyler, the young man with the phone, leaned forward, whispering to the Latina journalist in row 3. "We're up to 3,000 live viewers. The chat is blowing up. They're calling it Seatgate. Rachel Morales, seasoned and calm. scribbled in her notebook. She murmured without looking up. This isn't just a seating dispute anymore. It's a parable. Watch how it unfolds. Julian glanced around. Every face told a story. The couple in row 4, weary but supportive. Tyler, eyes wide with the thrill of viral fame. Rachel, steady hands catching every word for a future article. And Catherine, shifting between smug confidence and prickling doubt, still clinging to the belief that hierarchy would protect her. Naomi cleared her throat. Captain, perhaps Mr. Carter could take 3C? It's spacious, with more legroom. I'll personally make sure he receives complimentary service for the inconvenience. Her smile was polite, practiced, but Julian heard the subtext loud as thunder be the reasonable one, the flexible one, the one who yields. Julian tilted his head, his gaze piercing through the veneer. Naomi, let me ask you something. If I were dressed in a suit and tie instead of jeans and a hoodie, would you still suggest I be the one to move? Her cheeks flushed. She stammered, Sir, that's not, I didn't, because I have a boarding pass. Julian continued, voice even but rising with intensity. I followed the rules. I paid the fare. I did everything required. And yet, somehow, I'm the one being asked to adjust. He leaned closer, his words sharp but calm. Why is that? The question cut through the cabin. Naomi froze. Catherine smirked, sensing cover. Oh, don't play the victim card, she sneered. This is about logistics, not identity. Nobody cares what you're wearing. But the older woman in row 4 spoke up, her voice steady, carrying decades of truth. We all know what this is about. Her husband placed a gentle hand on her arm, but she didn't stop. I've lived through it long enough to recognize it. I see it. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. Even Captain Anders seemed to shrink. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, suddenly aware that whatever he decided here would not stay confined to a cabin. It would spill into headlines, social feeds, and boardrooms. Julian closed his eyes for a brief second. His heart hammered. Part of him wanted to scream, to shake the cabin into seeing what was plain. Another part wanted to retreat, to let it pass, to protect the company from a spectacle. But then he remembered his assistant's text, still buzzing in his pocket earlier that day. Board meeting at 2 p. Pacific. Need you on the ground by noon. Everything okay? He almost laughed at the irony. No. Everything was not okay. Everything was burning. Catherine leaned forward, her tone syrupy but sharp. You see, this is exactly what I meant. He's trying to turn this into a racial issue. He wants a scene, maybe a payout. I've flown long enough to recognize the game. Julian opened his eyes. Calm again. Cold, even. The only game here, he said, is you pretending rules don't apply to you. Rachel's pen scratched faster. Tyler's audience count ticked upward again. The comments scrolled so quickly they blurred. She said, what? Don't move. Bro, stand your ground. This is bigger than a seat. Captain Anders finally lifted his hand, his tone firm. That's enough. We're going to resolve this before we push back. Mrs. Whitmore, please provide your boarding pass so I can confirm your seat assignment. Catherine hesitated, eyes darting. Then she reached into her designer purse, rifling through receipts, business cards, glossy property brochures. She pulled out a crumpled slip and handed it over. Anders unfolded it, read it once, then twice. His jaw tightened. Mrs. Whitmore, he said slowly. This ticket is for seat 4D. The cabin stirred. Gasps, murmurs. A few whispers of unbelievable. Tyler angled his phone to capture the captain's expression, the slip of paper trembling in his hand. Catherine's face blanched, but she recovered quickly, her smile snapping back like armor. There must be a mistake. He specifically requested 2A when I booked. Anders shook his head. Your boarding pass clearly states 4D. There's no error here. Julian exhaled, steady, calm. He had known it all along. The truth was inevitable. Still, the captain's hesitation earlier, the flight attendant's suggestion it had already revealed everything he needed to see. Catherine crossed her arms, her voice shrill now. Well, I'm not moving. If this airline values my loyalty, you'll make this right. Julian leaned back slightly, folding his hands in his lap. The strategist inside him smiled. Let it build. Let her cling harder. The fall would be all the sharper when gravity caught up. And as the engines hummed, as the cabin held its collective breath, Julian Carter knew the real turbulence was still to come. The tension in the cabin felt alive, as if the plane itself had drawn a breath it could not release. Captain Anders still held Catherine's boarding pass in his hand, the ink on it as clear as the facts. Seat 4D, not 2A. Yet Catherine's posture was as rigid as ever. Her arms folded, chin lifted, like a queen awaiting courtiers to defend her crown. Julian sat quietly across the aisle, his calm more unnerving than anger. His silence was deliberate, chosen. It forced the weight of Catherine's defiance to echo against the truth everyone could see. But inside his chest, his heart drummed against his ribs, each beat reminding him how close he was to revealing everything, to ending the charade with a single sentence. Not yet, he told himself. Let it play out. Let the world witness. Naomi returned with a tray, her professional smile painted back into place. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Carter, she said softly. May I offer some additional champagne while we sort this out? It was a classic tactic smooth the surface, drown tension in bubbles. Catherine accepted her glass with triumphant flair, sipping as if nothing had been decided. Julian declined, his eyes locked on Naomi. You've seen the boarding pass, he said quietly. What else is there to sort out? Naomi faltered, lowering her eyes. We want all our guests to feel satisfied, she murmured. Satisfied. A word that was safe, neutral, bloodless. But in that moment, Julian heard what she didn't say. Satisfied, even if it costs you your dignity. Catherine set her glass down with a clink. Exactly. Thank you. Naomi. See, the crew understands. They value loyalty. They value people who matter. Her words cut through Julian like ice. People who matter. His mind spun with memories hotel lobbies where he had been mistaken for a porter. Board meetings where his ideas were dismissed until repeated by someone else. Even childhood classrooms where teachers assumed his brilliance must be copied from another student. Every moment whispered the same poisonous refrain. You don't matter. He thought of the thousands of employees working under Aurora's logo, people who didn't know he quietly held the reins. He thought of young entrepreneurs of color who looked to him as proof that success was possible, even in a world that doubted them. He clenched his jaw. This was bigger than him. Catherine leaned toward the captain. Surely you don't expect me to give up this seat after all these years of loyalty? Look at him. He'll be fine in row 4. It's just a chair. Why make a scene? Anders rubbed the bridge of his nose, his voice low. Mrs. Whitmore, the ticket is clear. Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Carter. The older black man in row 4 spoke again, his voice gravelly but strong. Captain, with respect. If you let her stay there, you're telling every one of us here that rules only apply to some. His wife nodded firmly beside him. A ripple of agreement moved through the cabin. A businessman in row 5 shifted uncomfortably, but spoke up too. It's his seat. We all saw the boarding pass. Let's not waste more time. For the first time, Catherine's confidence wavered. She glanced around, realizing the tide of opinion was shifting. Her lips tightened. Then she snapped. You all don't understand. This isn't about rules. This is about respect for loyalty. I've built my life on loyalty, and I expect it in return. Julian leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cutting. Respect is earned, not demanded, and loyalty isn't an excuse to erase someone else's rights. The cabin fell into silence again. Naomi shifted nervously, clutching her tray like a shield. Finally, she looked at Julian, her expression caught between apology and fear. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice gentle, "please understand. If you take 3C, we can leave on time, avoid escalation, and you'll still be in first class. Sometimes it's easier to just move on." Julian's eyes narrowed. Easier for whom? The words landed like a hammer. Passengers shifted, their eyes darting between Naomi and Catherine, waiting for an answer neither of them could provide. Julian's pulse pounded in his ears. He could feel the tug of his own doubts. Was it worth it? Was this the hill to stand on when he had meetings, obligations, and shareholders waiting? Was this fight too small for the weight he carried? But then his mother's voice came back to him, clear and steady from childhood. If you surrender the little things, you'll never win the big ones. Dignity isn't a detail. He looked Naomi square in the eye. I won't move. I shouldn't have to. And if Aurora Airlines is asking me to trade my dignity for departure time, then Aurora Airlines has a bigger problem than a delayed flight. The statement landed like thunder. Rachel Morales' pen scratched furiously across her notepad. Tyler's live stream counter ticked higher. 10,000, then 15. Comments scrolled in an unstoppable tide. Stand your ground. She's exposed. This is history. Catherine flushed crimson. He's grandstanding. She spat. He wants attention. That's all this is. Don't you see it? Julian didn't flinch. He turned his gaze toward the captain. I'll ask again. Captain Anders, what is Aurora's policy here? Do we follow the boarding pass, or do we follow the demands of status? Anders hesitated. His career had been built on flying planes, not navigating public reckonings. But he knew, with every pair of eyes watching, that neutrality was no longer possible. He swallowed hard. Aurora's policy is to honor the ticketed seat. That means 2A belongs to Mr. Carter. The declaration should have ended it. But Catherine clutched at her glass again, her voice shrill. If you do this, Captain, you're telling me my loyalty means nothing. You'll regret it. I know people. I can make calls. Julian finally allowed himself a small smile. Not of amusement, but of clarity. He had heard that threat before, too many times to count. The weapon of the entitled connections, influence, the illusion of untouchable power. Make your calls, Julian said softly. The world's already watching. Tyler's phone buzzed violently in his hand as the live stream surged past 20,000 viewers. Rachel lifted her head, her dark eyes sharp. She knew she had her story. Catherine sputtered, her words tumbling over themselves. This is absurd. I won't be humiliated like this. Not by him. Not in front of everyone. Julian's voice dropped low, steady as stone. Humiliation doesn't come from following the rules. It comes from pretending. they don't apply to you." The engines hummed louder, a reminder that the plane still hadn't moved. But inside the cabin, movement had already begun. The balance of power was shifting, and Catherine Whitmore, for the first time, could feel her grip slipping. Julian leaned back, folding his hands. His decision was made. He wouldn't yield. Not now. Not ever again. And as the silence pressed against every passenger, the captain's radio crackled from the cockpit. A dispatcher's voice sharp with urgency. "Captain Anders, ground control's requesting an update. Departure delayed. Reason listed unresolved passenger conflict in cabin." The world was waiting for resolution. And Julian Carter knew that the next choice, his choice, would ignite more than a flight. It would ignite a fire. The cabin had gone quiet again, but it was no longer the silence of indifference. It was the kind of silence that followed a sharp crack of thunder when everyone held their breath for the next strike. Catherine sat rigid in the seat that was not hers, clutching the armrests as though they were the last evidence of her power. Julian remained across the aisle, shoulders squared, eyes steady, his calm becoming a louder declaration than any raised voice could have managed. Tyler Nguyen's phone was angled discreetly toward the aisle, but the red dot glowed without shame. His audience had passed 30,000 and was climbing fast. The comment feed streamed like wildfire. Some viewers were angry, some were supportive, and some were simply hungry for drama. But every single one of them was locked into what was happening at 30,000 feet below the clouds. Rachel Morales scribbled across her notepad, pausing only to snap a few photos with her phone. She wasn't live streaming. That wasn't her style. She was old-school journalism, methodical, precise, already thinking about the headline that would run in the morning edition. She could smell the weight of history here, the way one story could ripple across industries, spark debate in boardrooms, even in Congress. The older black couple in row 4 leaned forward. The husband's voice, gravelly but strong, carried across the cabin. "Young man," he said to Julian, "don't let them move you. We've seen this game too many times," his wife added softly. "You stand your ground. For all of us." Julian nodded once, grateful but heavy. He felt their words like anchors. He wasn't just fighting for a seat anymore. He was carrying the expectations of every person who had ever been told to step aside, to be flexible, to yield for someone more appropriate. Catherine shifted, her eyes darting nervously to the passengers now watching her with less sympathy than before. She forced a smile, brittle and cold. "I don't know why everyone's so invested in this," she said loudly. "It's just a seat. Why make such a spectacle?" Her words rang hollow. The spectacle wasn't Julian's doing. The spectacle was her refusal to admit the simplest truth that the boarding pass in Julian's hand was more than paper. It was evidence of a promise broken the moment she refused to stand up. Julian's voice was quiet, but it cut through the cabin. "You made it a spectacle when you decided my dignity was negotiable." Catherine's face flushed crimson. "Don't twist this into some civil rights issue," she snapped. "I've earned my place here. I've given this airline years of loyalty, money, recognition. What has he given? He just bought a ticket." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the cabin. The older woman in row 4 shook her head, whispering, "She doesn't even hear herself." Tyler's phone buzzed violently in his hand. He mouthed the words, 50,000, to Rachel, his eyes wide. Rachel barely glanced up, her pen racing faster. She knew what this meant. The story had already left the cabin. It was in living rooms, office cubicles, dorm rooms across the country. Every word Catherine spoke was echoing far beyond these walls. Captain Anders stood stiffly in the aisle, the boarding pass still in his hand. His voice was firm, but weary. "Mrs. Whitmore, the facts are clear. Your assigned seat is 4D. I need you to move." Catherine shook her head, gripping the armrests like lifelines. "No, I will not be humiliated. Not by him. Not in front of everyone. If you force me, you'll regret it. I'll call my contacts. I'll have your job." Naomi, still clutching her tray, whispered urgently to the captain, "We can't delay much longer. Operations is already asking for updates. If this goes viral, Anders cut her off. It's already viral." His eyes flicked toward Tyler's glowing phone, toward the dozens of passengers now holding their own devices discreetly angled toward the scene. He exhaled heavily. A man who had flown through storms, but never one quite like this. Julian sat still, letting the storm swirl around him. Inside, his thoughts spun faster than the engines outside. He could end this now. He could stand, reveal the truth that he owned the majority of Aurora Airlines, that his word carried more weight than Catherine's status, that the app on his phone could ground this plane with a single swipe. But he didn't. Not yet. He wanted them to see her. He wanted the world to see what entitlement looked like when it was stripped bare. Catherine, sensing her grip slipping, raised her voice again. "You all think this is about race? It's not. It's about order. It's about keeping standards. If we let anyone sit wherever they want, what's the point of loyalty? What's the point of status?" The businessman in row 5 spoke up, his voice clipped. "The point is rules, and the rules say that isn't your seat." A murmur of agreement followed. Even some who had tried to stay silent now shifted, their eyes hardening. The tide had turned. Julian caught Catherine's gaze, holding it steady. The only standard that matters here is fairness, and the only loyalty that counts is loyalty to what's right. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at the captain again, desperate for an ally, but Anders only shook his head. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you don't move voluntarily, we'll have to escort you to your assigned seat." "That's final," Catherine sputtered, her composure cracking. "This is outrageous. You'll hear from my lawyer. You'll hear from corporate. I won't forget this." Julian leaned back, his face unreadable. Inside, though, his thoughts burned. He had waited long enough. He had given her every chance to step down with grace, to admit her error. She hadn't taken it. And now, as the phones captured every word, every gesture, he knew the time was coming to reveal the truth. Tyler's live stream counter passed 60,000. Comments poured in faster than he could read them. Some were furious, some incredulous, some celebratory. But one comment repeated again and again, a phrase that echoed the quiet dignity of Julian's silence. "Hold the seat. Hold the line." Julian closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He felt the hum of the engines through the floor, the stale recycled air pressing against his skin, the collective heartbeat of a cabin holding its breath. When he opened them again, his decision was clear. The next move would be his. For now, he let the silence speak for him. The plane sat still on the tarmac, engines humming like a restless animal caged. The air inside the cabin was charged, as though static electricity danced invisibly between every row. Conversations had quieted to murmurs. People leaned in, eyes wide, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Catherine Whitmore remained in seat 2A, her hands clenched white around the armrests. She was not just holding the seat, she was holding her entire identity. Her belief that power was hers by default, that the world bent toward her comfort. Her lips trembled, though she tried to mask it with a tight smile. Julian Carter sat across the aisle, posture tall but calm, his gaze fixed on Catherine. Outwardly, he looked composed, almost serene, but inside, his thoughts swirled in restless currents. He was tired of moments like this, tired of the second-guessing glances, the quiet exclusions, the subtle tests of whether he belonged. And yet, he reminded himself, this was more than personal irritation. This was a mirror of the world, reflected back in one seat on one flight. Rachel Morales tapped her pen against her notebook, then spoke loudly enough for those around her to hear. The fact is simple. The boarding pass shows 2A belongs to Mr. Carter. Anything else is obstruction. She didn't address Catherine directly. She spoke as though giving a report, her words clipped and objective, but everyone understood the subtext. Tyler Guyen, gripping his phone, whispered numbers to himself like a mantra. 70,000, 75, 80. His stream was climbing faster than even he expected. The comments now flew so quickly he could only catch flashes. She's caught. Don't back down. History in real time. The older black couple in row 4 clasped hands. The wife whispered, Lord, let him be strong. The husband, his jaw set, whispered back, he already is. Catherine exhaled sharply, then raised her voice. Do you people really want to delay this flight because of one man's stubbornness? The phrase hung heavy in the air. This time, no one missed it. Murmurs spread like ripples in a pond. Some passengers gasped. Others shook their heads. Catherine seemed to realize too late what she had said, her face flushing as she scrambled to cover. I didn't mean it that way. I meant passengers, travelers, everyone. Rachel's pen scratched furiously. Tyler tilted his phone closer, capturing Catherine's discomfort in high definition. Julian's voice emerged soft, but its softness carried more weight than a shout. You said exactly what you meant, and everyone here heard it. Catherine's head jerked up, her eyes flashing with something between fear and fury. How dare you twist my words? I've flown Aurora for 12 years. I've earned my place here. I shouldn't be forced to move for someone trying to make a scene. Julian tilted his head, calm still anchoring him. I didn't make a scene. Mrs. Whitmore, you did when you sat where you didn't belong and refused to leave. The businessman in row 5 leaned forward. He's right. Enough is enough. We all have connections. We all have meetings. But rules are rules, and you're not above them. Catherine's jaw tightened. Don't lecture me. I've contributed more to this airline than any of you. Naomi Tanaka stepped closer, her voice shaking but firm. Mrs. Whitmore, if you don't move to your assigned seat immediately, I will have no choice but to call security to escort you off the aircraft. Catherine's laugh was sharp, unhinged. Security for what? For sitting in a chair. You think Aurora will dare humiliate me like that? I know, directors, board members, donors. I will have your badge by morning. Naomi froze, her cheeks burning. Catherine's words stung because they carried the weight of truth. People like Catherine had ruined careers with a phone call before. Julian saw Naomi's hesitation. He saw the fatigue in Captain Anders' eyes, the way authority bent under pressure when the pressure came dressed in entitlement. He thought of all the times he'd watched people like Naomi bear the burden of compromise. His chest tightened. He couldn't let her take the fall. He stood slowly. The motion itself made the cabin lean forward. All eyes locked onto him. Catherine's breath caught in her throat, as though she feared what was coming but couldn't look away. Julian's voice carried a quiet power. "I will say this once. Mrs. Whitmore has refused every opportunity to do the right thing. She has insulted me, questioned my legitimacy, and tried to weaponize her status against this crew. The evidence is clear, and it is recorded. What happens next will not be forgotten." Catherine laughed again, though the sound was thinner now. "Oh, please. What can you do? You're just a passenger. You don't make decisions here." Julian slipped a hand into his jacket pocket. His fingers brushed the phone that contained an entire network of authority, an app that could summon decisions Catherine couldn't imagine. He felt the weight of choice pressing on him. If he revealed the truth now, Catherine's power would collapse. But it wasn't just about her. It was about exposing the system that enabled her arrogance. He hesitated. Inside, two voices wrestled. One urged patience, to let her reveal herself fully, to let the world see her for who she was. The other screamed for action, for justice now, for ending the humiliation before it festered deeper. Catherine's sneer tipped the balance. "Men like you don't belong in first class unless someone paid for your ticket. Admit it, you're just hoping for a payout, some free upgrade." The older woman in row 4 let out a sharp gasp. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Julian's decision crystallized. He withdrew the phone and unlocked the app with a flick. The screen glowed with the Aurora Airlines crest. Beneath it, a row of commands reserved for only one man in the world. He raised it high enough for passengers to see. "This," Julian said evenly, "is the control panel for Aurora Airlines. And this," his thumb hovered over a single red button, "is what happens when the owner has to act." Gaffs erupted. Rachel's pen froze mid-sentence. Tyler nearly dropped his phone as the live chat exploded with disbelief. Captain Anders stiffened. "Mr. Carter, what are you doing?" Julian's eyes met his. Correcting an injustice, he pressed the button. The screen flashed. "Flight 726, grounded by CEO directive. Return to gate immediately, almost instantly." Anders' headset crackled. "Captain, this is operations. We've received a CEO override for your flight. Confirm status. You are ordered to return to Gate 12 at once." The captain's face drained of color. He looked at Julian, then back to his headset. "Confirmed." Returning to gate, the cabin erupted in murmurs, some stunned, some exhilarated. Catherine's mouth fell open, her body collapsing into the seat as if gravity had doubled. You can't be serious. You're not." No, Julian's voice was steady. "My name is Julian Carter. I am the CEO of Orion Dynamics, majority owner of Aurora Airlines. This aircraft, this seat, this company, it all answers to me." The silence that followed was deafening, pierced only by the whir of the engines powering down. Passengers stared at Julian with wide eyes, some whispering, others fumbling to capture every detail on their phones. Rachel's lips parted. "My God," she whispered. Then louder, "You just grounded your own plane." Julian nodded. To prove a point that should never have needed proving. Dignity is not negotiable. Fairness is not optional. And no one, no matter their status, has the right to take what isn't theirs. Catherine trembled, her voice breaking. I didn't know who you were." Julian's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And that is exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with respect." The engines quieted as the plane taxied back toward the terminal. Outside, flashing lights gathered near Gate 12. Inside, the cabin held its collective breath, aware they were part of something far larger than a delayed flight. Julian returned to his seat, boarding pass still in hand, his face unreadable. Inside, though, he felt a storm breaking. The moment he had avoided for so long stepping fully into the role of enforcer, not just leader, had arrived. And the world, watching through thousands of screens, would never look at him the same way again. The jet bridge door opened with a hollow clang as the aircraft rolled to a stop at Gate 12. The cabin lights brightened, washing over rows of anxious faces. Some passengers exhaled in relief, others whispered in disbelief, and many kept their phones trained on Julian Carter, as though they were afraid to blink and miss history unfolding. Catherine Whitmore remained stiff in seat 2A, her hands trembling now despite her stubborn posture. She had not moved, not even when the captain announced the diversion back to the terminal. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the look of someone who had spent her life being obeyed and could not fathom what disobedience felt like. Julian sat across the aisle, calm, unreadable. His phone still rested in his hand, the Aurora Override app glowing faintly. He could feel the stairs pressing against him from every angle, but his mind was somewhere deeper. He wasn't thinking about Catherine anymore. He was thinking about every young employee who would wake up tomorrow and see this story, every passenger who had ever felt lesser, every quiet injustice that had gone unrecorded. The jet bridge rattled as footsteps approached. Then came the sound of a firm knock on the cabin door. Naomi glanced nervously at Captain Anders, who gave her a nod. She opened it, and 3 uniformed airport security officers stepped inside. Behind them walked Linda Chavez, Aurora's vice president of operations. Her navy blazer was sharp, her stride deliberate, her expression taut with controlled fury. "Captain," Linda said crisply, "brief me." Anders cleared his throat. "Passenger dispute. Boarding pass for 2A belongs to Mr. Carter, Mrs." Whitmore refused to move. "Flight grounded by CEO directive." Linda's eyes flicked instantly to Julian. Recognition dawned, and her composure cracked for only a second before she masked it with professional calm. "Mr. Carter," she said, inclining her head respectfully. "Sir, I'll take it from here." Catherine blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Sir, who is he?" Julian's voice was even. "She'll explain." Linda turned toward Catherine. Her tone clipped. "Mrs. Whitmore, you are occupying a seat that does not belong to you. You were informed multiple times and refused to comply. As such, you are in violation of federal aviation regulations and Aurora policy. You will be escorted off this aircraft immediately." Catherine's jaw dropped. "You can't do this. I'm a platinum elite. I know the board. I know your donors. If you remove me, you'll regret it." Linda's eyes hardened. "You should know something, Mrs. Whitmore. The man you've been insulting is not just another passenger. He is Julian Carter, CEO of Orion Dynamics and majority owner of Aurora Airlines. This aircraft is his property in every meaningful sense. And you, Mrs. Whitmore, are trespassing." Gas swept through the cabin. Tyler's phone shook in his hands as the live stream counter rocketed past 100,000. Rachel Morales set her pen down, her voice low but clear enough for her recorder. "The truth is out." Catherine's face drained of color, or she shook her head, her words stumbling. "No, that can't. He can't. You're lying." Julian finally rose to his feet, slow and deliberate. His gaze met Catherine's, steady but not cruel. "It shouldn't matter who I am," he said softly. "You shouldn't need my title or my wealth to treat me with basic respect. But since you demanded authority, here it is." The officers stepped closer. Catherine clutched at the armrest like a drowning woman grasping driftwood. "Please," she whispered, "don't humiliate me. Not like this." Julian felt a flicker of something human, almost pity, but he pushed it down. Pity did not erase the venom she had spilled. Compassion did not cancel accountability. He gestured gently to the officers. "Escort her to her assigned seat or off the plane. The choice is hers." Catherine's pride would not allow her to stay. She rose shakily, her designer scarf slipping from her shoulder. Passengers' eyes followed her every step down the aisle as the officers guided her out. Some whispered words she could not hear, others recorded in silence. Her exit was not quiet. It was historic. When the door closed behind her, a collective exhale rippled through the cabin. Some passengers clapped softly. Others simply looked at Julian with awe, as though they had been in the presence of something larger than themselves. Linda Chavez turned to Julian. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of Aurora Airlines, I offer my deepest apologies for what you've endured. I will be making a full report, and immediate disciplinary action will follow. Do you wish to continue this flight, or would you prefer we rebook you privately?" Julian shook his head. "The flight will continue. These passengers deserve to get where they're going, and I'll sit in the seat that was mine all along." He moved toward 2A. The cabin hushed again as he lowered himself into the window seat. The leather cooled beneath him. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself to exhale. But his mind was still restless, his heart heavy with the weight of what had just unfolded. Rachel Morales stood briefly. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice steady, "may I ask one question?" For the record, Julian turned his head, his eyes calm but sharp. "One?" Rachel lifted her pen. "Why ground the plane? Why take it this far?" Julian's gaze swept the cabin, over every passenger, every phone, every witness. "Because dignity isn't negotiable," he said. "Because if I'd moved, if I'd yielded, it would tell every person here that entitlement wins and respect is conditional, and I won't allow that. Not on my airline, not on my watch." The cabin fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not tense, reverent, the kind of silence that follows when truth has been spoken and nothing more needs to be said. Outside, flashing blue and red lights faded as ground crew cleared the area. Inside, the engines hummed back to life. But the passengers knew they weren't just flying to San Francisco anymore. They were flying into a storm of headlines, a story that would echo far beyond Gate 12. Julian rested his head briefly against the seat, his eyes closing. He could already hear the roar of tomorrow board meetings, media calls, public statements, but for now, he allowed himself one fleeting moment of stillness. The storm had broken, and he was ready. The engines hummed steadily as Aurora Flight 417 climbed back to cruising altitude, the gentle vibration through the cabin almost soothing after the storm of chaos at the gate. Julian Carter leaned back in his seat, window shades slightly open so the afternoon sunlight brushed across his face. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes still on him, some curious, some sympathetic, some still tinged with judgment. Tyler. The young man seated in 2C hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Carter, Julian," he said, his voice barely audible. Do you think people like her Catherine will ever understand?" Julian looked out the window at the blur of clouds stretching to the horizon. "Understanding isn't what we're owed, Tyler. Accountability is. Respect isn't a gift. It's a standard. He turned his gaze to the aisle, scanning the rows of passengers who were now settling back into their seats. Many were quiet, lost in their own thoughts after witnessing the confrontation. Naomi, seated across from him in 2B, fidgeted with the edge of her notebook. "Sir, Julian," she said cautiously, "what was going through your mind when she refused to move?" When she started shouting, Julian smiled faintly, a rare crack in his otherwise composed demeanor. "I was thinking about everyone who's ever been invisible on a flight. Everyone who's ever been dismissed because of the color of their skin, the way they dress, the name they carry. I felt every one of them in that moment." Naomi blinked, her pen poised but unused. She had expected a CEO's cold pragmatism, not this raw honesty. It must have been terrifying to confront her like that. She admitted softly. "It was," Julian said, "but it was necessary. Fear is a small price to pay for dignity. And yes, there was fear, but there was also clarity. I had to make sure no one else on this flight or anyone watching from home thought they had the right to humiliate me, or anyone else, without consequence." From the back of the cabin, Rachel Morales lowered her recorder slightly and leaned in. "Julian, people are going to share this story for years. Some will cheer, some will criticize. Are you prepared for the backlash?" Julian chuckled quietly. "I've been preparing for a lifetime. Leadership isn't about popularity. It's about courage. It's about showing the people you serve that their safety, their dignity, their right to exist without harassment, these things aren't negotiable." Meanwhile, in the first-class galley, Linda Chavez spoke quietly with the cabin crew. "We need to ensure that every passenger feels safe for the rest of this flight," she said firmly. "No one else should feel the way Mr. Carter did. I want proactive intervention if even the slightest tension arises." Sophia Marquez, the lead flight attendant, nodded. "We'll do it. I'll personally monitor 2A and 2B. We can't afford to let a single microaggression go unchecked. Back in 2A." Julian's thoughts turned inward, darker and more intimate. He thought about the countless meetings he had attended, the endless boardrooms where his voice had been questioned, interrupted, or ignored, and the quiet indignities of being underestimated by colleagues, investors, even friends. He clenched his fists lightly, fighting the swell of frustration that threatened to overshadow his calm exterior. He took a deep breath, remembering the advice his father had given him decades ago. Power is not about proving your worth to the world. Power is about creating spaces where everyone else's worth can shine. That was why he had built Aurora Airlines the way he did, with systems designed for fairness, accountability, and transparency. Naomi noticed the subtle tension in Julian's posture. "Are you angry?" she asked, almost whispering. "I'm not angry at her," Julian replied, a slow exhale punctuating his words. "I'm angry at the structures that allow people to feel entitled to diminish others, at the systems that reward arrogance and punish humility, at the silence of those who witness injustice and do nothing." Naomi nodded, scribbling furiously. "It's powerful, hearing you say that. Most people would just be satisfied with winning the argument." Julian's eyes softened. Winning the argument isn't the point. The point is teaching respect, creating accountability, showing that choices have consequences. I didn't humiliate her. She humiliated herself by thinking the world would bend to her whims. Rachel Morales, still observing from a few rows back, recorded silently, captivated by Julian's composure and insight. She sensed this story was more than a viral moment. It was a lesson, a subtle but undeniable challenge to anyone who believed privilege equaled entitlement. As the plane leveled out, Julian glanced at the passengers around him. Families, business travelers, first-time flyers, all of them now witnesses to the event that had just unfolded. Their reactions were varied, but most seemed quietly reflective. Some had tears in their eyes. Others whispered to loved ones. A few typed furiously on their laptops or phones. Julian wondered how many would carry this experience into their lives. How many would let it simmer as a small seed of awareness that might grow into broader understanding. He let himself smile faintly. A small act of triumph, not over Catherine Whitmore, but over the larger systemic inequities that allowed her behavior to seem acceptable in the first place. He was aware of the irony. The woman who had tried to claim authority over him had, in a sense, handed him a platform to educate hundreds without saying a word to anyone directly. Catherine had left a wake of tension behind her, but the momentary storm cleared, giving way to the calm Julian preferred. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a second, and allowed the subtle vibration of the plane against his body to ground him. Here, thousands of feet above the ground, surrounded by strangers. He had reclaimed not just his seat, but his narrative. He thought again about the young passengers, the interns, the travelers who might never meet a CEO of his background in person. Perhaps seeing a black man assert his authority with dignity, with calm, with empathy, would leave a mark deeper than any spreadsheet or press release could. Perhaps it would ripple outward, touching decisions and behaviors long after they left the airport terminal. Julian's inner monologue shifted, touching the personal as well as the professional. He considered his own growth, the years of discipline, the countless setbacks, the quiet mornings spent reviewing policies and data to ensure fairness, the late nights balancing ethics with corporate demands. Every choice he had made led to this moment sitting in his seat, whole, respected, and unyielding, even when confronted with someone determined to undermine him. He was not perfect. He knew that. He had flaws, moments of doubt, times when his temper or impatience had threatened his vision. But right now, as the sunlight pooled across the cabin and passengers slowly returned to their routines, he felt the quiet satisfaction of integrity upheld. He also knew the fight was far from over. This incident would reverberate through Aurora Airlines, through corporate boardrooms, through social media timelines, through family discussions, through countless individuals' perceptions of what dignity and accountability looked like in action. The stakes were high, but he was ready. Julian leaned forward slightly, opening his tablet to review the flight manifest. He noted each passenger's presence, each crew member's assignment, and began composing a brief internal memo, not for his ego, not for public acclaim, but to ensure that today's lessons would translate into structural change. Aurora Airlines would be safer, fairer, more accountable because of this confrontation, and that knowledge, quietly cultivated, gave him more satisfaction than any viral clip or news headline ever could. Naomi, sensing a shift in the energy, exhaled quietly and set her notebook aside. "You make it look effortless," she murmured. Julian's lips curved in a faint smile. "It's not effortless," he replied. "It's discipline, clarity, and a refusal to compromise on what's right." The plane continued its steady hum across the sky. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting clouds in shades of gold and rose. Inside, passengers quietly processed what they had witnessed. Julian allowed himself one small moment of peace. He had reclaimed more than his seat. He had reclaimed the narrative, and in doing so, had created a moment that might ripple far beyond the confines of the cabin. And yet, as he reclined, he knew the deeper work had just begun. Lessons would need to be taught, policies reinforced, behaviors challenged. But for now, he could sit in 2A, breathe, and know that in this small microcosm of the world, justice had been observed. Characters in Part 9 consistent throughout story. Julian Carter, blackmail CEO. Catherine Whitmore, white female entitled passenger. Naomi Young, assistant is journalist. Rachel Morales, reporter. Linda Chavez, Aurora VP. Sophia Marquez, lead flight attendant. Tyler, passenger. Captain Anders, pilot. The flight continued smoothly above the clouds, but Julian Carter felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere inside the cabin. It was not the turbulence reported by the captain on the intercom. It was the quiet tension of minds processing what had just happened. Every seat carried a story now. Every gaze carried judgment or curiosity. Julian could sense it. He had spent a lifetime learning to read human behavior, and right now the energy in the cabin was heavy with unspoken questions. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket and leaned slightly forward, resting his hands lightly on the armrest. The hum of the engines and the occasional clink of a drink cart moving down the aisle created a rhythm that matched the cadence of his thoughts. Julian reflected on the earlier confrontation with Catherine Whitmore. Her entitlement had been brazen, almost theatrical, yet predictable. He had seen similar arrogance throughout his career, in boardrooms and meetings, in fundraising pitches and networking events. What was unique this time was the setting, the raw immediacy of public witness, and the stakes amplified by the confined space of a first-class cabin. Naomi sat beside him, her notebook now closed, but her eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. "Do you ever get used to it?" she asked quietly, voice carrying a mixture of awe and concern. Being challenged like that in public, Julian paused. He thought about the countless moments where he had been underestimated, dismissed, or openly questioned. He thought about the sleepless nights spent planning, strategizing, and sometimes silently enduring microaggressions that left scars invisible to others. "No," he said finally, his voice calm but resonant. "You don't get used to it, but you learn how to respond without letting anger control you, how to assert authority without resorting to intimidation, how to be firm but fair." Naomi nodded slowly. "It must take so much energy, carrying all of that composure." "It does," Julian admitted, "and sometimes I question myself. I wonder if my restraint is enough, if my actions are making a difference. But then I look around, and I realize that the change I create doesn't always have to be loud. It just has to be consistent, visible, and principled." In the back of the cabin, Rachel Morales whispered to Linda Chavez, "I think people are starting to see him differently. He's not just a CEO. He's a presence, a lesson in dignity and patience." Linda smiled faintly. "That's exactly it. And the best part is, he doesn't need to prove it to anyone. It's already evident in how he carries himself, how he interacts with the crew, how he addresses the passengers." Meanwhile, Catherine Whitmore, seated several rows behind, fidgeted uncomfortably. Her usual air of control had evaporated, replaced with something unfamiliar introspection. She stared at the empty space where Julian had sat moments ago, a strange weight pressing on her chest. The passengers around her whispered softly, casting sidelong glances. For the first time, she felt the sting of public accountability. Julian's mind wandered briefly to her reaction. He did not relish seeing someone humbled. What he wanted was clarity, education, a realization that privilege did not equate to unearned authority. But the human heart was complex, and he understood that some lessons required time. He had seen transformation before, and sometimes it began with discomfort, the kind that made people pause and reconsider their assumptions. Sofia Marquez, moving quietly down the aisle, ensured that no further conflicts arose. Her presence alone seemed to stabilize the cabin, a silent reassurance to both passengers and crew that order and respect were non-negotiable. She exchanged a brief glance with Julian, a subtle acknowledgement of shared understanding. They did not need to speak. The moment was clear. Julian's thoughts returned to his internal struggle, the private doubts and fears that no one saw. He remembered the moments early in his career when he had questioned whether his voice mattered, whether his decisions could truly influence systemic change. He had carried those doubts quietly, letting them fuel his resolve rather than diminish it. Now, as he looked around at the passengers and crew, he recognized the fruits of that persistence. Change was incremental, but it was tangible. Tyler, still seated across the aisle, whispered again, "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if someone like her had taken advantage of you in a less public setting?" If no one had been watching, Julian's jaw tightened slightly, a shadow crossing his expression. "I think about it every day," he admitted. "The truth is, injustice often happens quietly, without witnesses. But that's why we must act, even when no one is watching. Integrity is not performative. It's a constant commitment." Naomi leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I think that's what makes you different. You don't just fight for yourself. You fight for everyone who might not have a voice." Julian allowed himself a small nod. "That's the only way to lead. And it's why I built Aurora Airlines the way I did. Systems, protocols, policies, all designed to prevent what just happened from happening to anyone else." That moment at the gate wasn't just about me. It was about making a precedent, setting a standard in the galley. Linda and Sophia exchanged a quiet look, both feeling the weight of the unspoken acknowledgement the flight had become more than a journey from one city to another. It had become a lesson in accountability, a microcosm of the broader society, where power, privilege, and justice intersected. Catherine, meanwhile, was battling her own internal storm. She replayed the confrontation over and over, dissecting every word, every gesture. Her pride had been bruised, but more troubling was the realization that she had been blind to the impact of her actions. The self-reflection was uncomfortable, almost painful, yet necessary. She could not undo what had happened, but perhaps she could begin to understand. Julian watched her from across the aisle, a faint smile touching his lips. He did not gloat, did not take satisfaction in her discomfort. He simply allowed the natural consequences of her choices to unfold, believing that reflection and responsibility were more powerful than any victory. Rachel Morales quietly typed into her recorder, her words capturing not only the events, but the subtle lessons embedded within them. This was not just a story for the news cycle. It was a story that would linger, that would provoke thought, challenge assumptions, and inspire dialogue. Julian's restraint, his clarity, his unwavering commitment to dignity, these were the true headlines. The plane continued to soar, the turbulence outside a faint memory compared to the emotional currents within. Julian leaned back once more, allowing himself a moment of calm, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had navigated a storm far more complex than the weather. The cabin was still tense, but it was also reflective, a shared experience that would resonate long after the passengers had disembarked. He glanced at Naomi, who was now sketching quietly in her notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you ever feel overwhelmed by all of it?" she asked softly. "Every day," Julian admitted. But overwhelm is not the same as defeat. I carry it with me. I process it, and I act. That is all any of us can do. And sometimes, the act itself is the change. Sophia passed by once more, offering a reassuring nod. Julian returned it, silently acknowledging the countless people whose efforts often went unnoticed, but whose presence made all the difference. Change, after all, was never a solo endeavor. By the time the flight attendants began preparing for descent, Julian felt a quiet sense of resolution. The confrontation with Catherine had ended. The passengers had witnessed justice tempered with dignity, and the broader lesson had begun to take root. In a world that often rewarded arrogance and dismissed humility, he had demonstrated that integrity, patience, and courage could shift perspectives in profound ways. The plane began its gradual descent toward the terminal, the sunlight waning, casting long shadows across the cabin. Julian looked out the window one last time, reflecting on the journey not just across the miles, but across the emotional and ethical terrain they had all navigated. He was reminded that leadership was not about dominance or ego. It was about responsibility, compassion, and the courage to stand firm in the face of ignorance. Passengers began adjusting in their seats, preparing for landing. Whispers turned to quiet conversations, some expressing admiration, some lingering in silent contemplation. The cabin felt different now, transformed not by spectacle, but by substance. Julian allowed himself a small, satisfied exhale. This was the power of presence, the quiet authority of principled action, and the profound impact of dignity in motion. Names of characters in parts 1 to 10. Julian Carter protagonist, Black CEO. Catherine Whitmore, entitled Passenger. White woman. Naomi Brooks, young assistant yes journalist. Rachel Morales, passenger. Documenting event. Tyler Guyen, passenger. Intern. Sophia Marquez, lead flight attendant. Linda Chavez, flight crew supervisor. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight reached cruising altitude, and the hum of the engines became a constant backdrop, almost meditative. Julian Carter leaned back in his seat, letting the leather cradle him as he allowed a rare moment of stillness. Despite the tension that had erupted earlier, he found a quiet satisfaction in the way the situation had resolved. Not because of his victory, but because of the clarity it had brought. The truth made visible in a space where pretense had previously ruled. Naomi, still seated beside him, scribbled quietly in her notebook. Her eyes occasionally lifted to observe Julian, capturing his composure, the subtle confidence that did not need to be declared aloud. "Do you ever get tired of being the example?" she asked, voice soft but carrying a weight of curiosity. Being the person everyone measures against, Julian exhaled slowly, considering the question. He thought of all the times he had been underestimated, ignored, or dismissed simply because of his race and background. He had learned early that strength was often silent, influence often invisible, and leadership most effective when it did not rely on fear or spectacle. "Sometimes," he admitted finally, "but I remind myself that the example is not about proving myself to others. It's about setting a standard, creating a framework where fairness and dignity can thrive, even in the smallest interactions." Naomi nodded, as if absorbing a lesson she had not expected to encounter on a commercial flight. She paused, glancing around the cabin. The air had shifted since the confrontation, a subtle awareness settling over the passengers. Conversations were quieter, eyes more attentive, and an unspoken respect seemed to linger in the first-class section. The ripple effect was tangible. Julian noticed it too, and it brought a sense of accomplishment that was deeper than any boardroom victory. He thought about Catherine Whitmore, seated several rows back. Her posture had changed. Her usual assertive stance was replaced with a hesitant, almost reflective presence. Julian knew that humiliation alone did not teach empathy, but discomfort often prompted introspection. Perhaps the seed of understanding had been planted. Meanwhile, Sofia Marquez moved through the cabin efficiently, attending to passengers with a balance of professionalism and warmth. Julian observed her from his seat, appreciating not only her competence but her understanding of human nature. She had maintained authority without escalating conflict, diffusing tension through calmness and clarity. In many ways, she embodied the principles he valued most: integrity, respect, and quiet strength. Naomi leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I noticed how everyone reacted when you didn't raise your voice, how you didn't need to. Why do you think that works?" Julian's gaze drifted to the window, watching the clouds stretch infinitely below them. "People respond to authenticity," he said. "When someone projects authority without aggression, when they communicate firmly but respectfully, it creates space for others to reflect. It challenges assumptions without creating enemies. That's the kind of influence that lasts." In the back of the cabin, murmurs of conversation had quieted to a subdued hum. Some passengers whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that carried surprise and newfound respect. Others sat silently, perhaps reflecting on their own behavior or the societal structures that had allowed entitlement and bias to persist unchecked. Julian knew the moment was fragile. Awareness alone was not change, but awareness was the first step. Catherine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her mind spinning. She replayed the confrontation repeatedly, analyzing Julian's calm demeanor, the subtle way he had asserted authority, the undeniable presence that had commanded respect without demanding it. For the first time, she confronted a reality that unsettled her deeply, that entitlement and status did not guarantee influence, that integrity and composure often outweighed privilege and aggression. She felt a twinge of fear, an unfamiliar vulnerability that gnawed at her ego. Julian, sensing the cabin's collective shift, allowed himself a quiet reflection. He considered his journey from being a young, ambitious entrepreneur to now owning a controlling stake in Aurora Airlines. He remembered the countless challenges, the microaggressions, the moments when doubt had whispered in his ear, asking if the effort was worth it. And yet, here he was, not merely surviving, but shaping an environment where fairness, dignity, and accountability were not ideals, but operational realities. He glanced at Naomi again, seeing her scribbles and the intensity of her focus. "You're capturing more than just the story," he said. "You're capturing the nuances, the reactions, the subtleties, the way people respond under pressure. That's where the real lessons lie, not in the headlines or the viral clips." Naomi looked up, her eyes wide with understanding. "I think I'm starting to see it," she whispered. "The flight, the confrontation, even the seat assignment. It's all a microcosm of society. The power dynamics, the biases, the lessons in empathy and accountability. It's like watching a world unfold in miniature." Julian nodded slowly. "Exactly. And the beauty of it is that change can happen in these small, visible moments. Each act of fairness, each decision made with integrity, ripples outward. People notice, even if they don't immediately understand. And over time, those ripples become waves." Sophia approached Julian with a tray of water, offering it with a polite nod. "Would you like some?" she asked softly. "Yes, thank you," he replied, taking the glass. He offered a brief smile, acknowledging her presence and the calm efficiency she had maintained throughout the turbulence of human behavior and air pressure. It was a small moment, but one that reinforced his understanding of leadership and trust. Catherine sat silently, grappling with her thoughts. Her pride had been wounded, but the discomfort was accompanied by a strange sense of clarity. She realized that her assumptions had been challenged, her behavior questioned, and that the lesson was not in punishment, but in understanding. It was a humbling experience, one that would stay with her long after the flight landed. Julian's gaze drifted over the cabin once more. He observed passengers reading, typing on laptops, and quietly reflecting. The hum of the engines had become a rhythm of introspection, each vibration a reminder of the journey not only through the skies, but through social awareness and personal growth. He thought about the broader implications of the incident. Public spaces, particularly those with visible authority figures, often mirrored societal hierarchies. Entitlement and bias were present everywhere, from airports to boardrooms, from classrooms to public institutions. Yet, the potential for accountability and education was equally present, if approached with calm, clarity, and purpose. Naomi broke the silence again, her voice tinged with awe. Do you ever worry that people won't get it? That the lesson will be missed? Julian considered this, his gaze steady. Sometimes, he admitted, but what matters is that the opportunity for understanding exists. I can't control everyone's reaction, only my own behavior and the environment I help create. Some will learn, some will resist, but every moment of visibility plants a seed. Catherine, still grappling with her internal dialogue, finally lowered her gaze to her hands. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, a sign that reflection was beginning to take root. Julian could sense the subtle transformation, though he did not need to intervene. True learning could not be forced. It had to emerge from recognition and introspection. The flight continued over the Atlantic, vast and endless, carrying passengers, dreams, and lessons. Julian felt a quiet satisfaction in the subtle victories, the affirmation of dignity, the exposure of entitlement, and the silent acknowledgement of principles upheld under pressure. These were the moments that defined character, shaped culture, and created pathways for systemic change. Naomi, glancing at her notebook one last time, asked softly, "Do you think the story will go beyond this flight?" Julian smiled faintly, a gentle, knowing expression. Stories have a way of traveling far, especially when they speak to something deeper than the surface. This flight may end, but the lesson has only just begun. As the aircraft glided steadily above the clouds, Julian Carter allowed himself a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and the quiet satisfaction of impact. The world below was vast, unpredictable, and imperfect, yet moments of integrity, visibility, and calm authority could ripple outward, shaping more than a single flight, more than a single seat, more than a single life. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment, and let the rhythm of the flight carry him. There was still much to be done, many systems to reinforce, countless hearts and minds to reach. But this was a start, and sometimes, Julian reflected, beginnings could be as powerful as endings. Julian Carter leaned back in his seat, watching the landscape below begin to transform as the aircraft descended toward its destination. The sprawling city lights shimmered like constellations on Earth, a reminder of the countless lives intersecting within a single frame. He felt a calm sense of completion, not triumph, as the culmination of hours in the air approached. Naomi sat across from him, her notebook closed now, a faint crease forming where she had furiously scribbled observations. She exhaled softly, the tension of the previous confrontations lingering in her chest. mingled with awe and curiosity. "It feels surreal," she admitted. "All that happened in such a short span of time. It's like a lesson disguised as chaos." Julian nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the first hints of dawn brushed the skyline. That's exactly it. The moments that seem chaotic often reveal the deepest truths about human behavior and values. How people react under pressure, how they choose dignity or aggression, humility or entitlement. It all surfaces in situations like these. Catherine Whitmore sat a few rows behind them, still absorbed in her thoughts. The glow of her tablet illuminated her face as she reviewed the notes she had frantically taken earlier. Her mind replayed the confrontation, Julian's calm authority, the ripple effects on the cabin. She felt a mix of regret and a dawning self-awareness. It was an uncomfortable clarity, one that forced her to examine assumptions she had long taken for granted. Sofia Marquez moved gracefully down the aisle, checking on passengers with a warmth that had been constant throughout the flight. Julian admired her ability to maintain poise, to transform tension into an opportunity for reassurance and understanding. She was a reminder that leadership did not always demand visibility. Sometimes it required listening, observing, and acting decisively in subtle ways. Naomi finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "Do you think people will really change after what happened?" she asked. "Or will it just be a moment they forget once the flight ends?" Julian considered the question carefully. "Change is not immediate. Awareness is, and awareness can lead to reflection, reflection to conversation, and conversation to action. Moments like this plant seeds, and those seeds take root in different ways for different people. Some may not understand immediately. Some may resist, but the potential for growth exists. That is what matters." Catherine shifted in her seat, her expression conflicted. She thought of her previous assumptions about entitlement and status, the way she had approached Julian with confidence rooted in privilege rather than understanding. She felt a pang of guilt, but also a glimmer of opportunity. Perhaps this confrontation could become a turning point, a chance to recalibrate her perspectives, to confront her biases honestly and meaningfully. The flight attendants began their final preparations for landing, the subtle movements and verbal cues orchestrating a sense of calm anticipation throughout the cabin. Julian observed quietly, appreciating the synchronization, the attention to detail, and the human touch in an environment often dominated by procedure and automation. As the aircraft descended further, Naomi turned toward Julian. "I've been thinking about the way you handled everything," she said. "The calm, the authority, the restraint. It's almost like you're teaching by example without saying a word." Julian allowed a faint smile, a mixture of humility and acknowledgement. "Sometimes the best lessons are unspoken," he replied. "People notice what you do far more than what you say. Integrity, patience, empathy. They resonate louder than any declaration or reprimand. Actions speak in ways words cannot always capture." Catherine, still processing her own reflections, glanced briefly at Julian. She wanted to express something, a recognition of the power imbalance she had exploited and the lesson she had received. Yet the words felt inadequate, heavy with the weight of acknowledgement and responsibility. She simply nodded, a silent gesture that carried more than any statement could at that moment. Julian's mind wandered to the broader implications of what had occurred on this flight. It was more than an isolated incident. It was a microcosm of societal dynamics, an illustration of how power, bias, and dignity intersected in real time. He thought about the policies he had implemented at Aurora Airlines, designed to protect employees and passengers alike from discrimination and injustice. This flight was a testament to the importance of those measures, a validation of the systems built to ensure fairness even in unexpected circumstances. Naomi's voice pulled him from his reflection. "Do you ever wonder if people like Catherine will ever truly see things differently?" she asked. Julian considered it, the hum of the engines filling the silence as the city lights grew clearer below. Some will, some won't. We cannot control every outcome, but we can create conditions for change. We can model fairness, insist on accountability, and remain consistent in our actions. That is the influence we have. The rest unfolds as it will. Sophia Marcus passed by again, offering a reassuring smile to a nervous passenger. Julian admired the grace with which she navigated the complexities of human behavior, the subtle cues that diffused tension and fostered respect. Leadership, he thought, was often about creating an environment where people could rise to their best selves, even when they might initially resist. As the aircraft touched down smoothly, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the cabin. Passengers gathered their belongings, their movements subdued yet purposeful. The events of the flight lingered in the air, a palpable reminder of the lessons learned and the emotions experienced. Julian watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing that while the flight had ended, the impact would extend far beyond these walls. Naomi scribbled a final note in her notebook, her eyes meeting Julian's with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "Thank you for allowing me to witness this," she said softly. "It's more than a story. It's a masterclass in leadership, dignity, and human nature." Julian offered a faint, reflective smile. "Stories are everywhere," he said. "Sometimes you just need to look closely, notice the small moments, and understand their significance. That is how we learn, grow, and influence the world around us." Catherine Whitmore rose from her seat, preparing to exit the aircraft. She paused for a brief moment, glancing at Julian one last time. There was no declaration, no apology spoken aloud, yet the gesture was meaningful. It was a silent acknowledgment of lessons absorbed, boundaries tested, and respect reluctantly earned. As the passengers disembarked, Julian remained seated for a moment, absorbing the quiet aftermath. The cabin, once a stage for confrontation and bias, had transformed into a space of reflection, understanding, and subtle reconciliation. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from victory, but from the recognition that truth, integrity, and patience had the power to shape human behavior and shift perspectives, even in the confined space of an airplane cabin. Naomi gathered her materials, ready to leave, but not before offering a final glance at Julian. "This will stay with me," she said softly. "Long after the flight, long after the story is written, I think this moment will continue to teach me." Julian nodded, the city lights now stretching endlessly below them. He thought of the future, of the work yet to be done, the policies to implement, the systems to strengthen, and the people to guide. The flight had ended, but the journey, both literal and metaphorical, was far from over. As he rose to exit the aircraft, Julian Carter carried with him a profound sense of purpose and a quiet confidence that the lessons of this flight, though ephemeral in the eyes of some, would ripple outward in ways both visible and unseen. The city awaited below, vast and intricate, a world full of challenges and possibilities. Julian stepped forward with measured grace, fully aware that influence was not claimed in moments of confrontation alone, but in the steady, consistent acts of integrity, empathy, and leadership that shaped lives over time. As the passengers disembark, the lessons of Flight 917 linger in the air, like the faint hum of the engines. Julian Carter's calm resilience reminds us that true power isn't about entitlement or intimidation. It's about integrity, empathy, and holding firm to what is right, even when the world pressures you to act otherwise. The confrontation may have ended, but the questions it raises remain. How often do we let assumptions cloud our judgment? How often do we overlook injustice because it's inconvenient to confront? We leave this flight with a mixture of admiration and reflection. The arrogance and privilege displayed by some serve as a stark contrast to Julian's quiet dignity, challenging us to examine our own behavior and the systems we navigate daily. And while accountability was served today, the deeper call is for each of us to foster awareness, respect, and fairness in our own lives. If this story made you pause, question, or feel inspired, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us for more stories that push boundaries, confront biases, and celebrate the courage it takes to stand with integrity. The journey is far from over, and the lessons are only just beginning.